Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And as you heard the opening sounds, I guess you realize this is our Halloween episode, Chris's favorite holiday of the year. So how you feeling, Chris?
I'm feeling so great about this. And one of the things is I've got to just be honest with you. I know we've been doing several haunted history podcasts over the last couple of weeks. And uh, last night I had a nightmare about this podcast that we were going to be talking about today. And I was really scared. And then I remembered that it was not being scared about the podcast. It's that I had this joke in my mind, and it was, what kind of horse does a ghost ride? And I remembered a nightmare.
Uh,
Did it to him? That didn't work. Hello? Is this thing on?
yeah,
Is it
it
working?
is. It took me
It's
a
working.
second. It took me a second. That's a good one. Did you really dream that one up?
Uh, that was uh, that was a dream that came about me thinking about the nightmare of these podcasts because you are so excited about these
Right.
things, and all it makes me do is scream for something different.
Well, I had a nightmare the other night, and it was I was back in the first grade. And I remember being in the dream thinking, do I really have to go through all this again?
But there's some points in which I say, gosh, it must have been nice to have everybody do everything for you. And, you just live life, and now here we are having to do so much more. And so I think a lot about these young people that we teach and that we work with each and every, it's, they've got it made sometimes, don't they?
They do. They do. They don't think they do, but they do. They have it a lot easier than we did.
Yes. That idea of work has changed a lot.
Well, I remember, when I was at school, if you had to write a paper, I remember, and I don't remember what grade I was in, but I remember having to write a paper on Abraham Lincoln of all people, a history figure, who would have guessed? But we had to pull out, my parents pulled out the world, those old silver world book
Oh,
encyclopedias,
yeah.
silver and black ones. Yeah. And that was my single source for my paper on Abraham Lincoln.
Because that's all we had.
Yeah. You
We
didn't have,
didn't have anything else. It was, an encyclopedia, which would allow you the ability to get what you needed to get. And, I go back and I think, about, we're talking about work, talking about school, but, one of the other things that has always made me question, and it kind of goes back to our podcast today, is that this we're talking about graveyards and cemeteries
Mhm.
and how these cemeteries are designed to not also just honor the dead, but to be a place for the living to go and to visit and to stay a while. And the one that we're talking about today, when I was doing some research on that cemetery, it kept talking about that this is a place where you could spend many an afternoon relaxing with loved ones and those long gone, picnicking and
I
reminiscing.
wish our audience could have a visual of Chris's face right now.
Because I'm just trying to think. The last thing I want to do is go picnic in a cemetery, and so I just don't get it. I don't understand. So that's
Well,
one of the things that I try to figure out.
so I take it you don't enjoy strolls in the cemeteries.
No, it's like I'm going, and to the point that people are competing with trying to get a perfect spot in a cemetery, and that they are willing to pay. Like this cemetery, people have paid to have their family members who have passed away to be relocated to this place because of the views.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, what,
What good is it
what,
doing them? Let me ask you a
yeah.
question. You have done in your career and as a not just as a historian, but as a pastor, you have done many funerals, right?
Oh, yes,
Do
yes.
you ever you know, after the funeral or maybe before everybody gets to the cemetery, just sort of walk around a little bit?
So as I'm walking to the place wherever it is that I'm officiating, I'll always just stop and look at the markers, and kind of look at the tombstones. One of the things that I'm very careful about, and I know I'm weird about this is that when I'm walking, I always watch where I walk
Yeah.
because there's a rhyme or reason. I don't want to like walk over walk on top of the tombs or whatever. And so I've had people ask me, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm trying to respect how, so it's a zigzag pattern that you try to do that I try to be mindful of." But I have, I kid you not, there was one time that I was doing a service, and on the other side of the place, there was some people. There was an umbrella tent, one of those beach umbrella tents. They had the beach chairs, they had a cooler, music was playing, and they were truly having a picnic at the grave. And I paused for a moment because it was like a party.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought, well, I mean, that's how some people
Yeah.
grieve, and that's how some people reminisce. And then once again, here we are doing our research and talking about Oakdale, and that's where people would go, especially in the Victorian era back in the day when Oakdale was first coming about. That this was entertainment, if you will. And that's the wrong word, I think, but this was the place where people would go to remember, to relax, and to visit.
I remember a number of years ago, I had gone to a different county to visit another college for a meeting. And one of my colleagues at that college was like, I was with somebody else from our college. And one of my colleagues from the other college is like, and I've known this guy forever. And he's like, you have got to see what we found on our property, you know. And so I'm like, what? He said, it's this old Civil War era graveyard. And he said, well, it's at the back of a field and, it's sort of in the woods. So the three of us, there we go, he in his truck and then us in my little SUV thing. Um, and I was driving to the back of this cornfield thinking this has got the makings of a horror movie on the front of it. But we went to the back of this field and went in a little ways into the woods, and there it was. A sure enough, very old, poorly kept up. I mean, nobody kept it up because nobody knew it was there, or at least the family that owned the property for I don't know how many decades didn't know it was there. And there it was, these very old tombs. So it was just that for me was very enjoyable. I've actually still got the pictures because I do enjoy a really old cemetery. I'm the kind of person if I'm at a funeral, I will wander off after the funeral to find the old part of the cemetery and go look at the graves. And the older ones, the better.
Well, and so therefore we've picked a great podcast today
Yeah.
because Oakdale Cemetery in Wilmington is our point of reference in our History You Didn't Know But Should haunted edition. And, Oakdale Cemetery was founded in 1852 and was the first planned rural cemetery in North Carolina, kind of fashioned off of some cemeteries located in Charleston and
Yeah.
Savannah, and really well known for the Spanish moss that would hang down from the trees, and just a place that invited people to see it not just as a final resting grounds, but also a garden, if you
Yeah.
will. And so, as we journey to that, we see that this is a garden, but it's also a graveyard, and it celebrates those that have passed, but also, rejoices with those who are living. And in between, there's a lot of paranormal activity that seems to go here. And there are some fascinating stories that abound in Oakdale Cemetery, a place that you are very familiar with, one in which you've walked those hallowed grounds. And so I'm interested in kind of diving into that context today.
And Chris is not surprised that I have spent time in Oakdale Cemetery. No,
How many times have you visited that cemetery?
we won't say. We'll just say I've been there. Okay. No, in all seriousness, it is absolutely a beautiful place. There are mausoleums in there that Chris, take the dead body out and clean the insides up. Obviously, you could live in them. I mean, they're that nice. They're very old. Some of them are in better shape than others, but the mausoleums out there, some of the tombstones, and some of the stories. And I wish, Chris, we could really do an episode just digging into some of the individual stories, not so much the cemetery itself like we're going to do today, but just some of the stories of some of these people that are buried out there, the stories around them. You've got, we'll talk about one man here in a minute, but you've got people out there who were Confederate soldiers. I think there's like over 400 Confederate soldier graves out there. There's an entire section of yellow fever victims because in the early 19th century into the 1860s, early 1800s, 1860s, yellow fever was a big problem in Wilmington, and you've got an entire section of Chris of bodies that were buried out there. A lot of them buried in unmarked graves. We know where the graves are, and they've got it marked off and identified. But you just walk there and you just think of how many people are actually there, yellow fever victims, Confederate War, just regular people. And by the way, they still hold funerals out there today. This is not a closed cemetery. I've been out there and you see a hearse and stuff go by. So it's still an active cemetery, and you need a map to get around the thing. I mean, it's absolutely huge. And when you mentioned about it being sort of fashioned after cemeteries in Charleston, very much so. It very much has that feel to it. And if I was a ghost, I would spend some time there.
Well, and I was just going to say, our listeners are already into this podcast, and I think they have discovered just how passionate you are about this. And, I didn't know until really studying this that I have a new label for you, that you are now known as a taphophile. And that you should be very interested in that a taphophile, that's TAPHOPHILE, that is someone who is passionate about gravestones and cemeteries and the history of death. You are a cemetery enthusiast, you are a grave hunter, and you are a tombstone tourist. And so you are a taphophile. So Dr. Ray, the taphophile shepherd, is the leader of our haunted tour of Oakdale Cemetery.
Yeah, and you know what? You said that, and it just there's some people I tell this to, and they just get extremely freaked out. Have you ever heard of the website Find a Grave?
I have, but it's probably on open tab for you.
Yeah. Oh, I have got they allow you to have like virtual cemeteries where you take people you've known or whatever, and you can flag them. It's almost like bookmarking them and put them in your personal cemetery. So you can virtual personal cemetery, so you can have access to them, to the picture and their information. It's almost like an ancestry.com thing. This sounds worse than it actually is. But it's also one of those things, if you sign up, you can actually be one of the people who goes out and takes photos of graves and uploads it to, and I've done that a little bit. So it's not as weird as it sounds. I know it sounds like, yeah, strange, but it's not as weird as it sounds.
Well, to those listeners that we just lost, I do apologize for that. For those that are just turning in, please go back to the beginning so that you'll kind of get a good understanding of where we're going with this. But that it is something that's important because gravestones do remind us of the past, because it is the final resting place. And I think when we kind of come back to that, when you look at Oakdale Cemetery, it wasn't just a piece of land that was purchased and you just said, well, we'll just put graves out here, but that it was architecturally planned. It was very specific. And, I did find it to be interesting that Dr. Armand John de Rosette was kind of the one who spearheaded this Oakdale project. And it started out at 65 acres. He paid like $1,100 in 1852 for this. Yeah. And now I think it's over 123 acres. So it's like doubled in size. And, why is that interesting in that it doubled in size? Because it doubled in size because it is right there in the center of downtown Wilmington. So, you have this large cemetery that has expanded, and it didn't just expand, but the architect and those that were involved in this, they had the specific plan of how to create that cemetery so that it would be that place where people could walk and could, visit.
Yeah, and you mentioned Dr. De Rosset, and he is a very interesting story because he was sort of the one that, was behind the initial plans and stuff of the cemetery. Ironically enough, and I have been to the grave, surprise, surprise, but ironically enough, his daughter was, I believe she was either the first grave in the cemetery or one of the first graves in the cemetery. His 6-year-old daughter passed away. Can't remember what she passed away of, but she did pass away. And of course, he was just absolutely devastated. And if you go to the cemetery today, Chris, there's a small tombstone and it's got like a lamb sitting on top of it. And it says, Our Little Annie there on the tombstone. But if you walk around sections of Oakdale Cemetery and other Oakdale Cemetery and other cemeteries as well, you will see tombstones. They're made out of stone, but they're like an incomplete limb or a broken limb is what it looks like, and that indicates a child is buried there. And you just have you, especially around where this child is buried, there's multiple of those where small children were buried. And his daughter, ironically enough, was one of the first graves to be, um, you know, uh, dug at there at Oakdale Cemetery. So the cemetery starts with a horrible tragedy, and and I'm sure there's many other. And I'm not sure. I know there are many other stories out there of tragedy and death, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, because it is a true walk through time, and I think within that cemetery, it does have all of the elements of murder and mystery and mayhem. And I think through previous podcasts we might have hit on a few unique stories about Wilmington lore and different things like that. And Oakdale Cemetery also has a history, because we have to remember that where it was founded, that the original people, they kind of also created the cemetery in the form of how the Native Americans would do their burial plots, where you would have uh, elevations, that you would climb a set of steps, and as you climbed up, there would be some graves, and then from where you were at that top, you could look down and you would see row after row after row, and if you were to do an aerial view of the cemetery, it's interesting that how it's laid out. It's very specific as to the design of it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that's always impressed me about it is, like I said a little while ago, you need a map. I mean, if you just get in there and wander around, it's gonna be fun. I mean, it'll be a lot of fun just to get in there and wander around and look at all the graves. But if you know where you're going and you know what you're looking for, and you're like me, what did you call me a little bit earlier?
A taphophile,
A tapophile?
yes,
Means crazy person. Uh, uh,
graveyard enthusiast.
yeah. If you're like me, just going through there, and I always, Chris, when I go into a graveyard, one thing, whether it's Oakdale or any others, one thing that I always think about is, okay, there was a time when this person before me was where I am. They were living their lives, they were doing what they thought was important, and now they've been in a grave 100, 200 years, and it always sets me to being a little philosophical when I'm around a graveyard. I think that's why I like the really really old graveyards. So the graveyards in Charleston or Oakdale and Wilmington, the really really old ones, they just there's a, I don't want to sound any weirder than I already do, but there is a there's a weight to it. I don't know if that makes sense. There's if you really ponder what is there and the stories, and every single grave is a story in every single graveyard. We study history, we teach history, we talk about history, but every single grave in a graveyard is a historical story. And, to me, that's just always something that gets me thinking.
Because within that place, you have mothers and fathers and husbands and wives and sons and daughters. And, within Oakdale Cemetery, you have architects and people who fought in wars. You have philanthropists. You have actresses, writers, painters, preachers, just a variety of different people who all have a story to tell. And, go back to the layout. It's interesting to me that there's a Hebrew section of the
Yes.
cemetery.
Yes.
There's a Confederate section of the cemetery. I would like to do some more research on this, because I also noticed that there was a section, and maybe you know more about it, that was called the section for Odd Fellows. And I'm not sure, but I think that is I don't want to say it's like the Masons, but there's a group of people called Odd Fellows, and so that there's a section within Oakdale Cemetery that is there. I know it has a Masonic area, so the cemetery has a variety of different places for people to be buried. I'm not sure, Ray. Maybe since you have visited there before, I'm not sure if they're still accepting room, or if it's all full, or I don't know, but
Yeah.
what a historical place.
Yeah, they're definitely yeah, like I said earlier, they're it's active. It's not a dead, it's no pun intended, it's not a dead cemetery. It's still active.
So who controls it? Is it who's in charge of it?
I am not sure. Hang on a second. That is a very good question. I'm not sure. I probably have heard. Let's see, Oakdale Cemetery, Wilmington, who operates, is it the city of Wilmington? Hang on. Let's see. Um, let's see. I'm not real sure. That's not Oakdale Cemetery. I'm not really sure who operates it now. That
Well,
doesn't
it's a
have Oakdale in Wilmington. No, that's Wilmington, Oakdale Cemetery in Wilmington. It looks like a group. Let me see. Hang on, y'all. Let me look. Administration. Here it is. There is an office. Looks like a group called the Friends of Oakdale Cemetery
okay.
operate their web page.
Gotcha.
Yes, the cemetery has a web page. Go to www.oakdalecemetery.org and you can visit their web page. They also have a Facebook page, Chris. And the great thing about the Facebook page, and Chris is talking about the park-like atmosphere of the cemetery, you can definitely see that on this Facebook page. I want to tell a story, Chris. Can I tell a story?
Sure, go ahead.
Guy called William Elderbrook. The year is 1880. A guy called William Elderbrook. William Elderbrook is a riverboat captain. And of course, if you know anything about Wilmington, that's where the Cape Fear River opens into the Atlantic Ocean. And he's there in Wilmington. I believe, if memory serves me correct, he is visiting with his father. And he is downtown when a building catches fire. He goes into the building and his dog goes in after him. His dog's name is Boss, sometimes called Old Boss. His dog goes in after him. Neither one are ever seen again. When the fire's put out and everybody starts going through the rubble, they find Mr. Elderbrook there face down in the building, having been killed by a falling beam in the building. And what do they find beside him but Boss? And Boss has a piece of his pant leg in his mouth, where the dog was trying to drag him out before being overcome by smoke. Both Boss and Elderbrook are buried there in Oakdale Cemetery. On the front side of the headstone, you've got William Elderberry's information, and on the back side, you have an image of a dog. Because
Nice.
both buried there in the same grave. I think they're actually in the same coffin. So it's not a scary story. There's no ghost attached with that, but it's just one of my favorite stories at Oakdale Cemetery.
I think, and that kind of leads to, why graveyards are so noisy
Hmm,
because of all the coffins.
that's
You're
wrong.
welcome.
Well, Chris, I think this has been an interesting episode. We didn't get into the spooky stuff so much, but Oakdale Cemetery, of course, does have, a legend of being haunted. I think they close it up around 5 o'clock, so you've probably got to get on a tour or something to go out there at night. But it does have a legacy of being haunted. And have you ever been in a cemetery at night, Chris?
That is a no, and I will not. I have no desire. No, no, I'm not. There's nothing going on there that needs me to go and hang out at night. Nope.
Nope, nope,
I,
nope, nope.
I do not want anything to do with it.
Chris is like, that's a hard no. No.
That's a hard no.
Well,
That's a hard no.
anyway, so we need to put together a podcast field trip with all our listeners and go spend the night at the Oakdale Cemetery walking around, and Chris could be there with us.
Yes, that would be great entertainment for everybody but me.
Yeah, that's exactly right. All right. I hope everybody enjoyed this episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. Hope you have a safe and happy Halloween. Until next time, I'm Ray,
And I'm Chris.
and we will talk to you later.